You might think the biggest battles in the world today are being fought on battlefields, through missiles, or in diplomatic showdowns. But the truth is far more subtle and far more consequential. The real shift in global power is happening quietly, right under our eyes, and it's reshaping the future of nations, economies, and industries in ways most people don't even notice. I'm Livia, and over the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a journey behind the headlines, showing you how America's closest allies are quietly pivoting toward China, defying threats of tariffs, trade wars, and economic retaliation. You'll see the deals being signed, the industries being transformed, and the hard data that proves this isn't just a trend, it's a structural shift in global power. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand why some nations are quietly choosing collaboration over confrontation, why certain industries are at the center of a new global battlefield, and why ignoring this change could mean being left behind in the next decade of international influence. In January 2026 alone, the world witnessed a stunning, almost unprecedented movement. 6 of America's closest allies, France, South Korea, Ireland, Canada, Finland, and the United Kingdom, all sent their national leaders directly to Beijing to sign major trade deals with China. That's right. Even as former President Donald Trump openly threatened more tariffs, trade wars, and economic punishment for any country daring to move closer to Beijing, these nations decided to prioritize economic opportunity over political caution. The message couldn't be clearer. The old rules of alignment are changing, and loyalty to Washington is no longer the automatic path to prosperity. Trump's approach has long been one of pressure and intimidation, leveraging tariffs and threats as a tool to enforce American influence across the globe. Yet despite these high-stakes warnings, the leaders of these 6 countries chose to walk straight into the heart of China's economic engine. They signed agreements promising billions in trade, investment, and collaboration across industries from automotive to pharmaceuticals. So the question we have to ask is simple but profound. Why are America's closest allies willing to risk retaliation and political backlash to pursue stronger ties with Beijing? What's driving them to prioritize long-term economic strategy over short-term political loyalty? The answer isn't simple, but the evidence is undeniable. The global power balance is shifting faster than most people realize, and the nations willing to adapt now will be the ones best positioned for the decade ahead. In the coming minutes, you'll see exactly how these deals are reshaping industries, creating new opportunities, and signaling a dramatic realignment in the world order. To truly understand why these nations are pivoting toward China, we need to rewind to September 2023, when then Secretary of State Antony Blinken delivered a statement that now seems almost prophetic. He warned that when countries like Beijing or Moscow claim that the international rules-based order exists only to serve the interests of the West, a growing number of nations would begin to question that system, and some would even challenge it outright. At the time, many dismissed his words as standard diplomatic caution, but just 28 months later, the reality of his warning is unfolding in real time. In a striking confirmation, Mark Carney, speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, made a statement that captured the essence of this shift. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Those words weren't just rhetoric. They were a candid acknowledgement that the international system, long anchored by U.S. dominance, is being fundamentally reshaped. Carney was signaling that the structures which once guaranteed stability are no longer reliable, and countries are beginning to act based on pragmatism rather than old alliances. This historical context frames today's geopolitical landscape. The allies moving toward China aren't acting recklessly. They are responding to a structural change in global power, one that blends economics, diplomacy, and strategic foresight. The rupture Blinken and Carney identified is now visible in trade agreements, investment flows, and national strategies, making it clear that the world is no longer centered solely on Washington's influence. Understanding this shift is essential to grasp why the next decade will look dramatically different from the last. One of the clearest examples of this seismic shift came with Prime Minister Starmer's groundbreaking visit to China. Over 4 days, Starmer secured trade agreements and investment deals that sent shockwaves through both the UK and the global economic community. These weren't small symbolic gestures. they were major commitments with tangible financial impact. The total value of the deals included $2.2 billion in export contracts and an additional $2.3 billion in market access for the next 5 years, not to mention hundreds of millions of pounds in Chinese investment flowing into British industries. Several high-profile agreements underscored the breadth of the collaboration. Chery, a major Chinese automaker, announced it would establish its European headquarters in Liverpool, a move hailed by the local government as one of the most significant developments for the city's manufacturing sector in years. In the pharmaceutical sector, AstraZeneca struck an $18.5 billion deal to license a weight loss drug from China, while committing another $15 billion toward expanding medicine manufacturing and R&D in China through 2030. Other sectors also felt the impact. The UK whiskey industry secured a 50% tariff reduction on exports to China, projected to bring in $250 million over the next 5 years. Popmart, the makers of the hit toy Lebu, pledged to open 7 stores across the UK, including a flagship outlet on London's Oxford Street. Even cultural exchanges benefited. The World Snooker Tour, headquartered in Bristol, announced a new event in 2 Chinese cities, valued at over $15 million. The reaction from the public and media was immediate and polarized. Critics accused Starmer of compromising political alliances, while supporters pointed to the sheer scale of economic opportunity and the pragmatism behind the move. Regardless of opinion, the numbers speak for themselves. This deal illustrates not only the speed at which nations are engaging with China, but also the strategic depth of these agreements, spanning manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, consumer products, and culture. In short, Starmer's visit wasn't just a trade mission, it was a declaration that the UK is adapting to a rapidly changing global order. While Western leaders were issuing threats and pushing tariffs, China took a different approach, one that resonated deeply on the global stage. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Xiang, China's vice premier, opened his remarks with a message of dialogue, trust, and multilateralism. "It gives me great pleasure to join you in beautiful Davos," he said, "to listen to each other, learn from each other, and build stronger trust." He emphasized that China's goal is to foster inclusive economic globalization, to build bridges rather than walls, and to strengthen international cooperation for a stable global order. The tone was calm, measured, and forward-looking, a sharp contrast to the combative posture emanating from Washington at the same time. While Trump was threatening tariffs and trade retaliation, insisting that countries must align with U.S. demands or face consequences, China presented itself as a partner offering tangible benefits, access, and collaboration. This difference in approach was not lost on global audiences, and it shaped the willingness of nations like the UK, Canada, and France to engage directly with Beijing. Victor Gao, a prominent Chinese international relations expert, made the point even clearer in a widely circulated interview. China is not a rival, an adversary, or an enemy. Britain should not overestimate its impact on the global scene, he said. China is a fact, a mega-trend that countries should engage with peacefully and strategically. Gao's perspective cuts through the noise, reminding the world that collaboration with China is no longer optional if nations want to stay competitive in technology, trade, and industrial capacity. The message is simple but profound. Engagement, not confrontation, is now the pathway forward. The scale of China's transformation becomes even clearer when we look at technology and education. Just 10 years ago, in 2016, only 3 Chinese universities ranked among the global top 20. Fast forward to 2026, and that number has skyrocketed to 16. This rapid rise reflects not just educational excellence, but a structural shift in knowledge, innovation, and human capital that is now driving China's global influence. China's dominance isn't limited to universities. It leads in manufacturing, electric vehicles, renewable energy, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. From producing 60–80% of EVs, solar panels, and wind turbines to leading the AI revolution, China has positioned itself at the center of industries defining the future. Even rare earth minerals, essential for electronics and advanced technologies, remain largely under Beijing's control, further consolidating its leverage in global supply chains. Western media, including the BBC, has begun reflecting this reality. Recent coverage describes China as owning the future of global power, a narrative unthinkable just a few years ago. The shift is undeniable. Nations, companies, and investors are now recognizing that to stay competitive, engagement with China's technological and industrial ecosystem is no longer optional, it's essential. But beneath the headlines about tariffs and trade deals lies the real battlefield of the 21st century: strategic metals and critical resources. The competition isn't just about semiconductors or artificial intelligence, it's about the raw materials that make those technologies possible. Lithium, copper, uranium, and molybdenum are not just commodities. They are the backbone of electrification, defense systems, renewable energy, and next-generation infrastructure. Take lithium, for example. After prices collapsed nearly 90% before bottoming in mid-2025, they rebounded sharply, signaling that the so-called lithium winter is over. Yet China controls roughly 60 to 70% of global lithium refining and processing capacity. That dominance gives Beijing leverage not only over batteries and electric vehicles, but over the entire clean energy supply chain. Copper tells a similar story. China imports around 60% of the world's copper ore and consumes close to 58% of refined copper globally. This positions Beijing to influence pricing, inventories, and long-term investment decisions in electrification infrastructure worldwide. Molybdenum may not grab headlines, but it is essential for strengthening steel used in defense systems, aerospace, pipelines, and energy infrastructure. China controls approximately 45% of global production and in 2025 reduced its exports by over 95% after implementing strict export controls. When quiet metals become scarce, their strategic importance becomes undeniable. This is where companies operating outside China's direct control gain attention. Vanguard Mining, trading under the ticker UFFF in U.S. markets, represents a diversified junior resource company with exposure to copper, gold, lithium, uranium, and molybdenum. Its projects span stable, Western-friendly jurisdictions, including Canada's Kamloops mining district in British Columbia, over 90,000 hectares in Paraguay's Piranha Basin near established uranium assets, and the Positos 1 lithium brine project in Argentina. For Western nations seeking supply chain security, diversification across friendly jurisdictions is no longer optional. It is strategic necessity. In a world where minerals are becoming geopolitical tools, securing reliable access to critical metals may determine which economies lead and which ones fall behind. As we move deeper into 2026, the implications of this shift are becoming impossible to ignore. Countries and companies that choose to collaborate with China are positioning themselves inside the world's fastest-growing industrial and technological ecosystem. They gain access to advanced manufacturing networks, critical minerals, expanding consumer markets, and cutting-edge innovation in areas like EVs, renewables, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. These partnerships are not symbolic. They translate into real export growth, long-term investment, supply chain resilience, and strategic relevance in the industries that will define the next decade. On the other hand, nations that resist engagement risk isolating themselves from the very engines driving global growth. Falling behind in technology, education rankings, industrial output, and trade access isn't a political talking point. It's an economic reality. As supply chains reorganize and capital flows toward opportunity, hesitation can mean lost competitiveness that is difficult to recover. Most importantly, this is not a temporary fluctuation driven by one election cycle or one trade dispute. The data, the deals, and the industrial capacity all point to something deeper. This is a structural transformation of global power. And structural shifts do not reverse easily. They redefine the rules of the game for decades to come. What we're witnessing isn't just another headline cycle or temporary diplomatic tension. It's a measurable realignment of global power driven by trade, technology, education, and, most importantly, strategic resources. 6 major U.S. allies pivoting to Beijing in a single month. Billions of pounds in UK-China deals. China dominating critical minerals, manufacturing, and top global universities. These are not isolated events. They are signals of a deeper structural transformation. The real question isn't whether this shift is happening. It's how governments, businesses, and individuals choose to respond to it. I'm Livia, and here at Global Shift Analysis, our mission is simple: cut through the noise, follow the data, and understand where power, money, and influence are truly moving. If you value fact-driven geopolitical insights that impact your future, make sure you subscribe and join us for the next analysis. The world is changing fast, and staying informed is no longer optional.